me, I have a slide about that.
And did you grow the beard just for the for being with the survey, or did you have that with the oil companies too?
I had it with the oil companies too. I figure, you know, once you become a, you know, a real geologist, a beard is required.
Mine hasn't come in yet.
Can you see that screen?
We can, and then I'm gonna make them like wave and ask you questions. So hopefully you can see all of
Okay.
that.
Yeah, and this is, you know, this is not formal or anything, so just stop me and jump in. I want to keep it, you know, open, and whatever questions you have, you know, I'll answer anything you want to ask me. I'm like the only one here today, so you don't have to worry about anybody hearing anything bad or anything like that. But yeah, my name is Timmon Drumm. I graduated in 2009 from the College of Charleston, actually. And then that was 2008, 2009 was just a really bad time for, you know, market just in general. And I mean, no one was really getting jobs doing anything. So I figure I might as well go back to grad school. So Dr. Butel actually wrote one of my letters of recommendation, and I jumped into LSU with the goal of trying to get into the oil and gas industry. But when I got there, I didn't do sort of a more traditional oil and gas thesis project. I actually did my thesis project looking at geothermal and geopressure conditions in the lower Tuscaloosa formation for carbon dioxide sequestration, which it's a lot of the same workflow and processes that go into oil and gas reservoir evaluation, but it just so happens that, you know, this is primarily what I'm working on now, so it worked out well. And then in the summer of 2010, I got an internship with Apache in Houston. And after that, they offered me to come on full time once I graduated. So in 2011, I actually started with Apache in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was there for about a year. And then after that, I moved to Houston, and we were in Houston for 6 or 7 years. And I was basically doing development and exploration, and development just means working in, you know, existing oil fields rather than trying to find new fields. And then about that time, Hurricane Harvey happened, and we decided we don't want to live in Houston anymore. And so I started poking around, and I accepted a job with Centennial, and that was in Denver. So moved up to Denver, and there I was doing exclusively development work, and then worked my way up to the team lead of all the geos there. And then COVID happened and everything like that, and we decided it's time to go home. I'm from South Carolina. I grew up in Greenville. My wife is from Birmingham, so we moved back to Birmingham, and I've been working with the Geological Survey of Alabama. And like I said, this is in Tuscaloosa. We're right on campus, which is kind of cool. And so far, so good. So now I'll kind of go into a little bit of detail on like what oil and gas work looks like. I won't go into too much here because a lot of the same stuff that you think about with oil and gas is what I'm working on now. So I'll go into more detail later. But as an oil and gas geologist, you're basically tasked with prospect identification and, of course, you know, classifying and risking all the prospects. And you do that primarily with well log correlation, especially when you're working onshore. There's so many wells, and every time you drill a well, you run tools like a gamma ray, resistivity, porosity, and by reading these log outputs, you can figure out what's down there, whether it's sandstone, shale, limestone, whether it's full of water, gas, or oil. And if seismic is available, onshore seismic can be lower quality than like offshore. Like this is an example of some offshore data. I just grabbed this stuff off the internet, so this isn't like anything I've worked on. And you use that to basically generate sets of maps, like a structure map and reservoir isopachs, like net feet of porosity or whatever the case may be, gross reservoir thickness, stuff like that. But you're not just kind of working in a silo as just the geologist. You know, it's a lot of cross-discipline work. There's lots of meetings, especially working with your reservoir engineer, who will figure out actually volumes of how much is down there, how much anticipated production is going to come on, and then what the economics look like. The landman, or sometimes they call it land professionals now, they're the ones that'll do all they're basically like half lawyer, half real estate agent. They're going to pick up the leases so you actually can go out and drill it. Sorry, it's my phone. And then the drilling engineer will work with you as far as, you know, planning for any sort of like anticipated pressure or, you know, making sure the target's correct. And then the completions team will be the ones who actually will go in and perforate the well, assuming that you found something. So, you know, your day-to-day work, you're basically, you know, it's a lot of time in front of the computer, lots of meetings, and especially when you sort of get a little bit higher up in your career. A lot of what I was doing at Centennial was more just project tracking. And so, you know, you have to be on top of the daily operations. We were running 7 rigs and you're constantly drilling wells and there's a million different things happening all the time. So you have to stay on top of the operations. You got to make sure that you're hitting your timing, because timing is tied to money, which drives, you know, the rate of return on all these prospects and wells. And you want to make sure that you're hitting your production targets and staying in budget. But what's cool and what's really exciting about oil and gas is that, you know, I always kind of joke that as a geologist, you're sort of a financial advisor for the company, because you're convincing the management to take a risk based off of what you've deemed, you know, a valuable project, and you're convincing them to invest a lot of money and hopefully make a lot of money on the back end. So it's a lot of data-driven decision making, and obviously there's a lot of uncertainty. You can't know exactly what's down there, but you do the best you can to limit the risk. But obviously there is a lot of risk involved, and it's very exciting. And, you know, you're comparatively to, you know, other industries, you're very highly compensated, but it also it's a very volatile industry. 2020 especially was terrible for a lot of industries, but I don't know how closely you guys track the oil price, but it actually went negative in, what was that, May or March or April or May. The oil price actually went negative, which I don't quite understand, but it hit the industry pretty hard. So I don't know if anybody there is considering oil and gas, but this is something to keep in mind. But, you know, I always kind of said that you're compensated for that volatility. So, you know, I always imagine, you know, being a geologist is, you know, certainly look maybe something like this guy out here, you know, taking rock samples and working in the field. But that was certainly not the case, especially in oil and gas. And it actually, at times, it felt more like this. And you're going to get phone calls on the weekend, and it's very busy, but it's very exciting. It's a great gig. But now that I'm at the Geological Survey, I'll kind of just break down the various departments here. So there's a ecosystems investigations group, and these are all the, this is where all the, as a geologist, where you might work. Coastal resources, I actually don't see them much. I typically just see the geological investigations. So this is the group that actually, they're the ones that work on the geologic mapping and actually do go out into the field. And then of course, groundwater assessment, they're in the field a lot as well. And they're the ones monitoring all the streams and rivers and groundwater modeling in Alabama. And then the energy investigations group, which is where I sit. The coal research is kind of dwindled off. I mean, coal's obviously on the way out, and there are like oil and gas fields in Alabama, but this, quite frankly, a lot of this is sort of a little bit outdated. This is sort of the projects that were worked on several years ago. But primarily what we're doing now is carbon dioxide sequestration work. And we have a very large core warehouse, which is just outside my office. So anytime there's core taken in the state of Alabama, as long as it's not proprietary, it'll come here, and you can just call us up and we can pull it out for you, and you can actually get your hands on some rocks, which is pretty cool. It's huge. I just grabbed this off our website. There's a lot of words in here, but like I said, the coal and oil and gas and unconventional. Well, there was a project not too long ago looking at some oil sands in Alabama, but like I said, primarily what we do now is CCUS research. This is where a lot of our funding from the federal funding comes from. And I'll go into more detail later. But, what's most striking here is that, the southeastern United States accounts for about 40% of the nation's carbon dioxide emissions. And Alabama is actually 9th among all the states. So there's quite a bit of urgency to get this research. And there are current ongoing real world projects that we're working on, where we're either doing site evaluation prior to CO2 injection, or we're monitoring active injection sites. So these are just some of the projects that we're working on now. I do a lot of work in this CCARB realm here, and I'll go into more detail of this Gorgas site to give an example of what these projects look like. And then you can also inject CO2 in coal, but primarily what we're looking at is saline aquifers, which there's a lot of in Alabama. So I'll kind of walk through more detail now of the workflow, because oil and gas and CO2 sequestration is, you're basically looking at a lot of the same stuff, but you're flipped it around to where you're not pulling oil and gas out, you're looking at injecting CO2 in. So we have tons of power plants in Alabama. And so you can collect the CO2 directly from the stack and compress it and, put it in a pipeline and inject it into, an onshore aquifer. They're doing it offshore. Or, depleted oil and gas fields and coal. So simply put, it's just the capture and storage of atmospheric carbon dioxide, and the geologic storage. You just have to inject it into a subsurface reservoir. And of course you need a good seal rock and a trap to ensure that CO2 is not going to migrate out and back into the atmosphere. And this is actually the Gorgas project, which I'll show. the work that we did here, this power plant here, and then this is actually where they drilled the well to inject the CO2. So your first step, like I said, is, looking at the well logs. So here's an example. This would be, your gamma ray curve, which is like a Geiger counter. You can sort of think of it that way. So like shales have a lot of radioactive minerals in them. So this would be a shale right here with a higher gamma ray reading. And then sandstone, you get this lower gamma ray reading. This is bulk density, which can be converted to density porosity. So you get some idea of the porosity of the units. And then resistivity reads, how resistive the fluid within the rock is. So oil is high resistivity, and like salt water, for example, is very conductive. So you have very low resistivity if it's full of salt water. And then from there, this is kind of hard to see, but you create these cross sections, and then you can correlate these individual units based off of the log response. And so you're actually mapping, individual reservoirs. Like, for example, you'd map this unit all the way across, and then here's sort of an output. This is a net reservoir thickness. So this would be with some porosity cutoff, say greater than 6% porosity within that sandstone unit. And then ideally your logs are tied to your core if you have it. So this is an example of a core description, and you can take plugs and samples of the core and run tests on it to actually ground truth your porosity. And then if you're looking at seals, like capillary entry pressure and stuff like that, to get an idea of the seal integrity of the shales.
So Timmon?
Yeah.
You were in the beams program, right?
Yes, I did.
Did that type of class help you do stuff like this?
In a way, yes. Because multi-beam it's not really like seismic, but the output you get, the maps you can generate are similar to seismic. And it was really, the beams helped me most by actually going out and collecting data and then working the data and transforming that into a usable product. But I didn't even know how to, quite frankly, I didn't know how to do any of this type of work until I got my first internship with Apache. I didn't even learn any of this in grad school. It was, really just getting into industry. And they teach it more now, but my first year of grad school, I didn't know how to do any of this. And yeah, I did do beams, and I enjoyed that. But at the same time, when I got off that boat, I realized I never want to do that again. I was seasick that whole time. I like being on land a lot better.
So did people that you were talking to understand how the multi-beam and stuff helped?
Yeah, and so that went a long way during the initial interview process for getting an internship, because they want to see, when you're talking to interviewers, they want to see real examples of work that you've done that can be applicable to real world stuff. So at the end of this, I kind of give some advice, but whatever experience you can get, whether it be, your own research project as an undergrad, will go a long way. Because that first year of grad school, when you're going through the interview process for internships, you're not far enough into your thesis yet to have really much to show. And so any sort of real projects that you can bring to the table and talk through will go a long way. So anything you can do, any sort of internship, any sort of real world experience is is very important.
Thanks. I just saw the relationship with the maps, and I was like, just that spatial thinking and data analysis.
Yeah, of course. Let's see, where's my, okay. And then, so yeah, you want to think about, all the reservoirs, and then trapping and sealing, and then additional components are, what the pressure and the temperature and the subsurface are gonna be like. And pressure, you kind of have to go from like proxy measurements, and then temperature is just on the well data, on the well log. So here's an example of, it's just a bunch of pictures, but this is sort of kind of the products you put together. This is just purely geology here, where you're tying your core data to your logs, and then you're mapping your formations across the project area, and then you generate maps. But you really need a more complete picture. So here's sort of a, the geologic characterization of your specific units, where you have thickness, porosity, you have some sort of trap area, and then density, which is derived from the temperature and pressure data. And then you want to integrate that with your seismic mapping to get a more clear 3D picture, because well data is sparse. So there's a lot of interpolation in between well data, but when you can map it seismically, you get a much clearer picture. And then from there, you can actually start to get a better idea of how much you can actually be injecting as far as volumes. And then you can actually run plume models based off of your geologic criteria that you put into this. Will actually model the injection rate over time, so you get an idea of spatially how far the CO2 is going, and then also if it's going to breach the seal and start to leak. So this is a more mature project, and I didn't actually work on this, but it's just a really cool example. And they're actually injecting currently. So, my day-to-day work is very similar as far as like the technical work that I'm doing, although working for the government as opposed to in the industry is the pace is a lot different. I'm not constantly fielding phone calls and being pressured, and it's much more relaxed environment here. I mean, I wear a t-shirt to work and tennis shoes, and don't have to, wear a collar and all that. And like I said, my office is right here on campus, as opposed to some skyscraper downtown, which is, I enjoy this a lot better. But, basically what I do is detailed geologic mapping that we kind of just walk through, and we're doing a lot of seismic work now, which is cool. The field work and mapping is pretty limited, but we do have a lot of core data and outcrop. So we actually, I actually do get to get my hands on rocks and tie that to what I'm seeing in the logs. But like I said, it's more driven here by project goals and objectives rather than return on investment or anything like that. And also I'd say it's more individualized project management here. I kind of work by myself a lot. Way fewer meetings. We have our team meetings and stuff like that, but everyone kind of stays on task. And then everyone I work with here is either a geologist or a geophysicist, which is kind of cool. So, working at the survey, we do have people that do the guy down the hall from me is actively, getting more and more granular, and he goes out in the field. He's like up here in like Huntsville, out in the field all the time. And that is an option working at surveys. But, like I said, that is not that's not the type of work that I currently do. And this is an example of a project we're working now. And this is a pre-site evaluation. There's no wells or, no injection being done. What we're looking at here is the client shot a series of 2D seismic lines. And what they're concerned about is these deep faults reaching the injection interval, which is up here in the Cretaceous above the Paleozoic unconformity. And what you have to make sure of is that these deeper faults aren't going to be going through your reservoir unit and create a pathway for that CO2 to escape out. You want to ensure that you don't have any reservoir breaches through faults or whatever. So this is a project we're currently working, and hopefully we'll be able to do similar work to the Gorgas project. So yeah, in summary, industry versus government workflow is very similar, but that's for me, just kind of the group that I landed in here. It's a lot of the same data and evaluation methods, and the maps and the products that I push out are very similar to what you would see if you're working in oil and gas, but the objectives are obviously very different. We're injecting CO2 instead of pulling out oil and gas, and we're actually doing something good for the world as opposed to just trying to make money for a company. So a lot of just in industry and what I do now is thinking critically within geologic frameworks, but you have a lot of creativity in your mapping, especially when you're hand contouring, and you have to think as a geologist. So you got to, to make accurate maps, you have to think, how is this deposited? Am I mapping a delta, or is this a channel sand, or is it a turbidite? That's going to influence how your map should look. And, you're not going to map a delta the same way that you would map a channel, if that makes sense. And yeah, I might be behind a computer, but I'm still a geologist. And so I have to make what I'm creating make geologic sense. So I get to utilize my understanding of geology and earth processes to influence real world decision making with enormous impacts. I mean, it's so cool to kind of see from inception to the final product, and then actually the application of your work. It's just, I think it's great. I mean, I get a kick out of this every day, which I think it's awesome. Okay, so now I put this together. My wife told me to take it out when I showed it to her last night, but just some unsolicited advice. I mean, I remember.
I wanted you to give unsolicited advice?
Yeah.
They're all nodding. This is what we want. Your wife doesn't nod. Don't tell her secrets.
I remember being, a senior at CofC. It really doesn't feel like that long ago. Time goes by so fast. I know that's a cliche, but it really does go by fast. And, I had no idea what a geologist does or what I was getting myself into when I went to Baton Rouge to go to grad school. And so this is sort of things that I've kind of picked up over time. So, take it or leave it, but I'll kind of walk through a few things here. And the hardest thing you're gonna run into is getting that first opportunity. So like Dr. Butel was saying, the beams work helped me land an internship because I had real products to show during the interview process. And a lot of these jobs that you see, you have to have a master's degree with experience. I mean, that's becoming more it's almost outside of maybe environmental work, which it still helps to have a master's, especially with environmental regulation and stuff like that will help get your foot in the door into that industry. So you pretty much have to have at least a master's. And in industry, especially, you know, a PhD can actually hurt you because then you're viewed much more as like a specialist rather than, you know, just a generalist. So that's, you know, this is the hardest problem, right? How do you get experience without experience? And just, I wish I had a better answer, but you just got to try really hard. You know, I mean, volunteer, you know, do whatever you can to do your own research projects, do anything that's going to differentiate you from anybody else. But I think that is going to be the hardest thing. And then once you're in and you're building experience, it sort of starts to snowball, and you'll find it easier. A lot more doors open once you get your foot in the door, but getting your foot in the door that's the hard part. But I'll say, you know, your network is going to be your most powerful tool. You know, I wouldn't say the only reason why I was able to land here, but a big reason is just, you know, new contacts who put me in touch with the people that I had to talk to here. And so, you know, over time, you're going to realize that the geologic community is really small and closely knit, and like everybody knows everybody. And, you know, you overlap with a lot of the same people if you're going to conferences or, you know, any sort of industry event or whatever. You see a lot of the same people over and over again. So don't ever burn bridges and maintain good relationships, even, you know, when you're leaving jobs or anything like that. You know, you always want to leave on a good note, and always and you know, keep into contact with the people that you meet. And, you know, it's important to not be an ass, basically, and stay in touch with your colleagues, and you know, the CofC alumni network is going to be a huge help. So that's more like work advice, and then just some general advice, which I think is good. Whatever you're doing, you know, work hard at it. And this is going to go a long way in the workplace too. And because people see that, and that's going to rub off on your colleagues, and your boss is going to notice that. And it's just whatever you're doing, make sure you're doing it to the best you can, and take pride in what you're doing. Save your money. You never know what's going to happen. I think this is important. Pay off your debt if you have it. And really find work that drives you. And I say, you know, work pretty much sucks, but it's better when you're excited about what you're doing. And floss. So here's my contact information. This is a picture of the quad. This is actually like right at the back door of my office out here. So it's like super cool working on campus. Even though I'm not an Alabama fan, I actually hate Alabama. So I'm in enemy territory here, but this is my work email. And Dr. Butel has my personal email. If you guys want to reach out to me, just email me, whatever. I'll be happy to give any sort of help, you know, just advice, resumes, or any sort of help I can be. You know, I'm happy to do it. So just feel free to email me, and if you guys have any questions, that's sort of it for the formal part of this.
You guys have questions?
I had a question. Whenever you're like injecting the CO2 into the aquifers, how do you seal it afterwards? Do you just put like bentonite clay in it afterwards? Or?
Yeah, so I'll go back. Okay, so let me go full screen so you can make it a little bit easier. So down here is in blue is the reservoir unit. And overlying the reservoir, so this could be your sandstone unit. And then, for instance, you might have a really thick shale package. Shale has really low permeability. So that's going to be your sort of sealing rock that's going to prevent any sort of escape outside of the reservoir. So you can imagine like you have this sandstone unit and then maybe it pinches out into a shale here, and you're kind of packaged in, surrounded by impermeable rock, and you have to drill down through that into your porous and permeable rock. You inject the CO2 down here, and then there's mechanics on board the drilling rig that's going to prevent any sort of surface leakage here. Of course, if you hear about a blowout, is when you kind of drill down into this high pressure stuff down here, and then everything wants to come up to lower pressure. So this stuff is going to want to shoot out. But they're called blowout preventers. They're on the rig floor. And you're also, when you're drilling down, there's a lot of mud, like actually like barite liquid, that you're maintaining pressure on that column to keep that down. So when this is open, when you're open to the surface and you're actually in the process of drilling or injecting, there's back pressure on the surface that's going to prevent any sort of fluid flow to kind of get to the surface. And then, yeah, once the drilling rig moves off, you put a cap, basically. It's actually called a tree because it kind of looks like a Christmas tree, but that's going to cap it so that nothing's going to get out of there. But in the subsurface realm, it's the geology that's actually going to create this seal. So that's a big component that you have to consider too when selecting these injection sites.
Cool, thank you.
I had a question about when you were working in oil and gas, and you said that you would get calls on the weekends. Is that something you knew you were signing up for when you took the job? And how did you?
Sorry, wait. Can you just say that again? I'm turning.
I can come closer.
Or I can repeat it.
So you said when you worked in oil and gas, you would get calls on the weekends. And is that something you knew you were signing up for when you took the job? And how did you manage like a work-life balance?
Yeah, no, I did not expect that. And especially early on in your career, you're under a lot of supervision. There's people above you who are going to kind of take the brunt of that. And when you first start out, a lot of it is just going to be honing your technical skills, like learning how to correlate and learning how to map seismic and learning how to make these maps, and then also what to do with them. It's great to be able to make these maps, but then you actually have to kind of understand the whole picture and what to do with it. And it wasn't until like you get a couple years in and your chain gets longer and you're getting more and more responsibility, that's when the craziness starts. And yeah, I mean, it's difficult, yeah, work-life balance is tough, but it's exciting. It's a lot of fun, but it's tough and it's a grind and it's stressful. But they pay you a lot of money to do it, so it's something to think about.
How big of a pay cut did you take when you went to the survey?
Oh gosh, it hurts. It's about I was making about I was making about 3 times what I'm making now.
Hopefully
Uh,
Birmingham is cheaper to live in than Denver.
Yeah, that's right. But you know, like I said, save your money. You know, oil and gas. It provides you. You know, you can get a couple steps ahead. You know, if you're smart about it. But
It's boom
Birmingham-
bust, right? So save for the
Right.
bust.
That's right. Yep. And yeah, it's a good thing Birmingham is cheaper.
Was that pay cut worth it though for like the better environment you have at the survey?
The question was the pay cut worth it for the better work environment and less stress?
Yes. Yeah, I absolutely love it here. This is sort of kind of what I was hoping for, I guess, if I had envisioned kind of what a career would look like. I love the people here. I love the fact that I'm right on campus. You know, I love the fact that I can just, you know, like I said, like I'm wearing a t-shirt right now and tennis shoes. And I love this work. I mean, I went to grad school trying to get into oil and gas, but, you know, I did my thesis work on CO2 sequestration because I was just so interested in it. And I thought it'd, you know, play a big factor in a, you know, a more global sense. And so now to kind of come full circle and be back doing this is, I mean, I love it. And yeah, just, it's so much more, I guess, laid back here. And yeah, I mean, there's like no stress. That's great.
If someone was interested in getting into CO2 sequestration, right, it's a new enough field that I've had people look into it and be like, what do I need to be, a geophysicist? Do I need to be a sedimentologist? What do I need to be? What should they be focusing there for grad school or just in general?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I absolutely go to grad school for it. And I'd say, you know, you're gonna pick up, you kind of have to be everything or have at least like working knowledge of stratigraphy and, you know, be able to apply the physics. But I mean, I'm by no means a geophysicist. I kind of, if I would classify myself as anything, I guess it would be like more of a stratigrapher. But I mean, it's all about getting familiar with working in the subsurface and what those data are, and then, you know, what kind of evaluation methods. But I would definitely look into just good grad programs, which I know that, I mean, the University of Alabama, I mean, I've seen several theses come out of here for CO2 sequestration, and, you know, you're tied in here with Southern Company, which is the big utility company who are actually funding these projects. But I could probably do some more digging on good grad programs, and they're going to get you exposure to all the well logs and seismic data, and you know, you'll take courses in stratigraphy and stuff like that. That'll give you a leg up.
All right, can I ask a geek question? Tim, can you go to your seismic that had the cross-section with normal faults?
Yeah.
What orientation is, okay, it's north, south. So are those normal faults Triassic?
Yeah, these would be sitting, I'm trying to remember the age of the basement here. But yeah, they would be sitting around there, likely.
I was just curious because the thing that's coming out of Texas and Oklahoma is that there are not Triassic normal faults that they're seeing in the subsurface. So they're saying the Eagle
And-
Mills is just sitting there, like without being normally faulted. That's what the people out of Austin are saying.
Yeah, so I'd have to get back. I have to relook at I have this paper.
It's fine, but I just thought it was an interesting, right? I was like, huh.
Isn't that so pennies and-
Yeah, and I'll
Faults are younger.
say that when we were doing this interpretation, the data down here is so crappy that, I mean, we could sit down and talk about this for a day, and you could tell me that there's a fault there or there's not, and I would probably believe you, whatever you decided. You really got to squint your eyes on this stuff. That's why they reach out the new data. This is the old data, and we're waiting on. This is just the initial processing down here. We're waiting on the final data to come in, and we can actually see this stuff a little bit better. But this stuff is so junky.
So you don't have to be a geophysicist to interpret seismic sections.
No, and this is it's just practice. Now, I would say you probably have to be a geophysicist to do it, like the processing and the coding. God, I took a class in grad school on that, and that was terrible. I mean, that's like, writing scripts and the actual processing work and good Lord, like wave theory and stuff like that. Yeah, you gotta be, that's not me. I'm not smart enough for that.
And then you also have to be confident enough that, sure, if I change the wave, whatever in this program, it actually will not just be making stuff up on the seismograph.
Yeah, no, there are some smart people who do that. That's not me.
Any other questions, guys? How many of you were thinking of going into carbon sequestration? One last geeking out question. So in Spain, they created this huge, they were going to create a gas reservoir offshore by injecting gas into where they pumped oil out of.
Yeah.
Well, so it fractured the thing and created a whole bunch of earthquakes, induced seismicity. Is that a risk with CO2?
Yeah. Anytime you're injecting anything underground, whether it's wastewater disposal, that's causing a lot of the earthquakes, in Texas and Oklahoma, or CO2. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a risk because you don't want to exceed the fracture gradient of the reservoir when you're injecting. And how do you know the fracture gradient without actually being down there? There's a lot of work that goes into that. And that's sort of where this modeling comes in. And so you really have to understand what's going on at depth in your reservoir unit. And, and you also don't want to exceed the seal capacity that's sitting above you either. Because, yeah, I mean, you can really do some damage if you don't know what you're doing. I don't know. I mean, are a lot of people, are you guys thinking, what do you guys think? What do you guys want to do? Like, is it like sort of more environmental work? Just grad school teaching?
We've got a lot of, we've got some beamers in here who are going straight to beams, some who are going to go do oceanography, some environmental, some no idea what they're going to do, some organic farming. COVID seems to have burned out a lot of people. So a lot of people that normally would be going to grad school are going to take a year and think about it.
Yeah.
Because everything has just been so chaotic.
Oh, I meant to include that on my summary slide too. I mean, as a geologist, you shouldn't have to pay for grad school. if you're a TA or a research assistant or whatever, I mean, I made money in grad school. You know, LSU paid for all my tuition and everything, and then I had a research assistant my first year, and then my second year I taught the intro lab courses. So if you're going to grad school for geology, that should be free. And environmental, I worked when we first moved back to Birmingham. I was the government process to get hired takes forever. So I was working at an environmental company in Birmingham, and cool, that is hard work. That's a young man's game.
Or woman's.
Or woman's, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Tim. And I can see some of them glancing at the clock. A bunch of them have 2 o'clock classes.
Yeah, no, I know how it goes. I was a senior in college too. I'm sure happy hours about.
Well, and they're all going, no, they've got classes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Hey, email me, you know, whatever, reach out. I'm happy to help in any way I can.
I might reach out to Geek Out